my good friend Donald Osborne, and we borrowed another fabulous car from the Audrain Museum. This is a 1924 Isotta Fraschini Type 8A, and it is an unrestored car. It's been, I think, maintained and updated a little bit. In the 50s, I think somebody went through it, but pretty much original, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, Jay. This is a great example of a town car bodied by Carrozzeria Sala of Milan, and the car, it was sold new to a hotelier in Milan who used it as the courtesy car for his hotel, the Hotel Metropole in Milano. And then after a number of years, it was actually sold back to the Isotta Fraschini company that kept it then for the next 60 years until it was sold to private ownership again.
You know, it's funny, if people know this car at all and they're a movie buff, you might remember it, although not this exact one, from the film Sunset Boulevard, the famous movie where William Holden meets the old-time silent movie actress and her chauffeur pulls the Isotta Fraschini out to take her through town and do all of that.
Exactly.
So it's pretty cool. It's a fascinating automobile. It's almost like the world's smoothest truck, you could call it, because it's an enormous thing. It had at the time the most powerful straight 8 engine developed. It was 160 horsepower, 7.3 liter, very sophisticated. A single overhead cam, 2 valves per cylinder. It was quite powerful because you needed power and torque for this hugely heavy body that's on this thing.
Exactly. The Isotta factory guaranteed that all of these cars would do at least 93 miles per hour, and they were massively expensive. This car cost more than a Model J Duesenberg when new.
Yeah.
And of course, Isotta's primary market was the United States, and as the Hollywood connection in Sunset Boulevard proved, it was very, very popular among the film stars in Hollywood, as well as with bankers in New York.
Well, the funny thing about Isotta Fraschini is everyone I've ever seen either was owned by Rudolph Valentino. When one guy showed me one that was, I think, a 28 or 29, I said, I think Valentino died in 27. Oh no, but he ordered it. He never picked it up, but he ordered it. So the connection to Rudolph Valentino, that's something like the movie Sunset Boulevard. It's one of those connections that you can't seem to escape.
Well, we do actually have in the Audrain collection the 1927 Isotta Fraschini 8AS Fleetwood Roadster that was ordered new by Rudolph Valentino.
I rest my case.
But it was completed after his unfortunate death at the age of 31.
Right.
But nonetheless, coming back to this car, the other fascinating thing is the fact that seeing a car like this that is so original in its character just give you insight as well as to the life of the time, you know? This car has a very capacious rear compartment, luxuriously finished, and things up here for the driver.
Very uncapacious.
Uncapacious indeed.
My knees are in my face. You're out in the elements. The idea was to make the chauffeur look as uncomfortable and work as hard as possible to drive the car. You had to wear the stupid little hat, and you had the gloves, and my feet. I mean, this is like a midget or an MG Sprite or one of those deals.
It's also quite interesting, Jay, that with this open compartment, there is a soft top that comes to cover the driver in case of rain, if the owner decides to let you stop to dispose it. But it's very interesting being in this car with this wonderful nickel framed windshield and this spectacular wood cowl trim. You do feel like we're in a motorboat, you know?
Yeah, it is. And you know, it's interesting. This car has been sitting for a while. We took it out of the museum, and the more you drive it, the smoother it gets. It begins to break in nicely, and it just, there's nothing wrong with these cars. The driving doesn't cure.
Exactly. Driving is always the cure. The other thing which is so wonderful about all these Isotta Fraschinis is also the wonderful gauges, the elegance of the gauges, most of which are French, interestingly enough. They source these gauges from various manufacturers, and there's wonderful, the fuel gauge, the water temperature gauge are French, the speedometer and tachometer are Italian.
Well, the interesting thing too is it's hard to relay the impact this had on people. Don't forget, in 1924, I think it's safe to say most of the population had probably never ridden in an automobile.
Exactly.
I mean, this was something. This car cost, I think, $28,000 in back in 24, which would be about $450,000 today. So it's mind-boggling.
Exactly, and even just doing the direct exchange doesn't really give you the magnitude of it. You think about $24,000. You think about the buying capability in 1924 of that kind of money, when many people earned less than $1,000 a year.
Right. I mean, the average home was probably well under $5,000.
Precisely, and it's also quite interesting that the boat connection in terms of the design of this car. The car was refurbished in the 1950s by Carrozzeria Riva in Italy, and not the same company that builds the speedboats, but somewhat related. And the interesting thing is, of course, that the house that we're going to see, or should say the property that we're going to see today, also has a wonderful boating connection.
Oh, okay. Well, I can see the kind of nautical theme right here.
And the Calvins, yes,
Yeah,
they're
the
absolutely
Calvins,
wonderful.
yeah. I know, this was a fascinating time to live, the teens in America, because it was probably the most innovative period in American history. Telephones, suddenly radio was being experimented with, vehicles were getting fast. I mean, it was unbelievable how many things, airplanes, things that had never been done just 20 years earlier was suddenly, look at this. I mean, I can't imagine growing up in that decade.
It must have been absolutely amazing, because the pace of change and development, as you said, was just so rapid, and lives were literally being transformed from what they were, from gaslight to air travel.
This is not an easy car to drive. It's a lot of work. It's very truck-like.
Which is funny, because I had the privilege of piloting this car out of the basement of Finmeccanica's offices in Rome, when it was first sold into private ownership, and I found that the steering was very smooth. I think that although it had sat for a very long time, as you mentioned, this car really needs to be driven.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be driven at a speed slightly higher than we can accomplish right here, right now. It's one of the things that's so wonderful about Isotta Fraschini, and I know something you appreciate, is the fact that they were a great airplane engine manufacturer.
Right.
Their engines powered the great Caproni bombers in World War I, which were acknowledged as the first great heavy aircraft ever built. And Isotta Fraschini continued as a builder of airplane engines through the interwar period and through World War II. And in fact, when they were absorbed into Finmeccanica, which is today one of Italy's and the world's largest defense suppliers, the company is, through extension, still a great supplier of goods to the military.
Well, the one thing this makes me appreciate is American cars. We get a certain inferiority complex that somehow in this period the European stuff was so much more sophisticated and so much better. And, driving a Duesenberg or like that Packard 12-cylinder, I think that's a much smoother, easier car to drive than one of these. This seems, I think the engine is sophisticated, a big straight A with an overhead cam, but it's no match for a Duesenberg.
So do you think that this is the case of an engine in search of a chassis?
Yeah, probably. I think that, this is an enormous, heavy piece of cast iron.
Yeah.
It's a big, heavy engine. You can feel it every time you turn the wheel. It's very nice, but just as a child, I had access to a lot of American old cars, but never these kind of cars, never these kind of sophisticated cars. They're always put on a pedestal high above any of the American stuff, And I think a Packard 12 from the period would blow the doors off of this.
So it's a matter of a prestige mark, the fact that the people in Hollywood and Wall Street wanted to have something that their neighbors necessarily couldn't have.
Right.
So they had a Packard, I had an Isotta.
Well, the thing I appreciate about American automotive manufacturing was it was made for the everyman, and for the everyman who was better than the average guy. But the average guy could
Aspire.
to it,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, it all trickled down, you know? So Donald, what house are we going to today?
Well, the property we're going to see today, Jay, is a very special one. It's called Swiss Village Farm.
Okay.
And it's got a remarkable history, and it's something that's slightly surprising. When we get there, it'll seem as if we've indeed crossed an ocean into a new continent. But the reality is somewhat modified. So it's a fascinating mixture of America and Europe together.
All right.
Just like this is Isotta Fraschini and the market it found in America.
Another Donald tenuous connection.
Ah! I am, as the king of the tenuous connections,
Yes.
going to string these wafer-like connections together into an iron block.
Do they have those little chocolates there that are quite popular?
You know, they just might, because every Swiss village has got to have chocolate.
You gotta have chocolate. Well, it's a perfect day to drive this car. You know, it's been pretty hot all summer, but today is one of those 60-degree days that cars like this just love. Just cool enough to keep everything running at optimum temperature.
And it's fresh. It's the ocean breeze is absolutely delightful. I think that it'd even be a better day to ride in the back in great comfort with our legs stretched out, but that's for another day.
Well, this is my favorite kind of car. It's sort of original and unrestored. As I said, been updated a little bit, been maintained, but not restored. I mean, I don't believe the steering box has ever been taken out or the engines have been out of the chassis. So you get the feel of what it was like back in the day.
Exactly, and this also happens to be the earliest surviving Isotta 8A in existence.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I remember the engine was a little smaller initially, and then they eventually went to the 7.3 liter, which is about, what, 430 cubic inches?
430 cubic inches, yeah. And again, with 160 horsepower, it also is a very potent engine, which is needed for a big heavy body like this has.
Right. Oh my God, you can feel it, that big box on the back. It's kind of why I hate Continental tire kits. A lot of people love them, but to me, you hung all that weight out the tail, you go around a corner and whoa, you can feel it just pull the car around. And that's what this box is like in the back.
Well, there's certain rules of physics that any element of design can't beat.
Right, right. It's funny, I've driven around this area, well, dozens of times, and I didn't know this place existed. You know, and all these cool places are behind high hedges and fences and trim lawns, and you would never know it was there.
And it's actually quite interesting because the name Swiss Village Farm, SVF, was originally Surprise Valley Farm because it was a hidden valley.
Oh, I see.
And it was a surprise coming upon it. And after the construction done here for this particular property, it acquired the new name Swiss Village.
So I didn't want to change the monogram on the towels, obviously.
You know, to stay rich, you have to be practical.
That's right, exactly. Well, we finally got here, and if you saw me driving, you realize this is not a subtle machine. It's an enormous vehicle. It's heavy. I think the tires are probably too big for the car. The tires back in this period were taller and thinner, so made for a little easier steering. But yeah, it's a big, heavy limousine. And it's funny, when you look at the engine, it looks like just the height of sophistication.
Well, as we said, Isotta being a great manufacturer of airplane engines, and perhaps the engine is the heart of this car, and perhaps an engine in search of a chassis, but the engine is absolutely beautiful. Let's take a look.
Let's take a look. Yeah, I mean, this is, you can't judge a car when it's turned into a town car, because town cars are just meant for the people in the back, and that's all. But look at this. Oh my God, look at this engine. Just, here are your priming cups right here. Twin carburetors. As I said earlier, this was the most powerful straight 8 engine in the world, at least for automotive use, when it came out in 1924. And the later versions were even more powerful.
Exactly, and Jay, because of the fact that Isotta Fraschini continued to make great, powerful engines for airplanes, I think it really says a lot about the technology involved. These are designed to be very durable, very long-lasting, and very reliable as well.
Yeah, and I give them credit. Overhead cam, which was just the height of sophistication back in the period, and beautiful. Oh, nickel.
The casting.
Oh, castings are all. Even the carburetors. There's no air cleaners because, as you know, the air was much cleaner back in 1924, apparently. But all this cast aluminum, just a beautiful, beautiful machine.
They cost a lot of money, but you saw where your money was going.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we should show the back. I mean, this was really what people look for.
Well, the place where everyone really wanted to be was right here in the back, in the owner's section. And we can see quite clearly the owner's command module, which is wonderful on this Italian delivered car. So you have commands for left, right, slow, fast, straight ahead, home, and stop. Absolutely wonderful.
Well, it's an example of what they did in the 50s. This is done in leather, which is incorrect, isn't that right?
That's right, Jay, because leather would have been used for the driver's compartment, but the rear compartment would have been cloth.
Right.
And probably a brocaded cloth, very similar to the original trim that you can still see in the interior. This wonderful braid here and on the door handles and on the grab handles. And of course, there's also a landaulet.
Yeah.
So the rear section actually
Folds.
detaches and folds down to make a convertible top.
It's amazing how you would just think it was a hardtop from inside.
Exactly.
And that beautiful dome light, which is fantastic.
All of the details were those that you would find in fine cabinetry in a home.
Right.
And it would come complete with vanity sets for the ladies and
jump seats. Look at this.
and jump seats as well.
And what does that do?
That is the securing for the divider window, which
Oh, I
you can
see.
pull down halfway
Oh, of
to
course.
communicate with the driver if you didn't want to use the megaphone, or you just wanted fresh air.
Right, right.
But it's a wonderful thing, and again, it exemplifies that style of living, which is one long gone.
Right. Well, this is a fabulous piece of property, Donald. I love all the stonework. We don't get stone in California. They don't build them out of stone because of the earthquake. So it's fun to see this.
This is absolutely remarkable, Jay, and this is a property which is quite interesting because it isn't exactly what it seems to be.
How do you mean?
Well, it was built for Commodore Arthur James and his wife Harriet by the architects Atterbury and Phelps to resemble a Swiss village. The Jameses on their honeymoon went to the Italian section of Switzerland and fell madly in love with it. So when they came back here to Newport, on this property they wanted to recreate what they had seen on their honeymoon. And this is an amazing place because it's been created, all built in 1916, but it looks like a village that slowly grew building by building.
Yeah, well, but it's still 104, 105 years old. That's pretty good.
Yes, but when you think about it, in 1916, it looked like a medieval
Right.
village from Switzerland.
Yeah.
And, however, it was not just a model like the hameau that Marie Antoinette built at Versailles, this sort of fake farm
Oh,
where
Marie
people would come in for
Antoinette.
the day.
Let them eat cake.
This is actually a working farm.
Right, right.
And at its height, around the time of World War I, employed 100 people here, and they farmed and provided food for all the staff of the James's many houses. They had houses here in Coconut Grove, Florida, in New York City, and also on his yacht. He had the largest sail and steam yacht built, the Aloha, an amazing thing. He was an amazing yachtsman. He was called Commodore because he was the head of the New York Yacht Club and founded the local yacht club here in Newport.
Oh, okay.
And so this was actually a working farm, and the depictions on the farm are also terrific. They're very much in the Swiss style. You see these sort of pictographs on various buildings as to their purpose. We've got the creamery, and we have the carpenter's shop, and we have the milking barn. It's an absolutely amazing testament. Over the decades, it went through various property owners for various purposes, but it was then purchased by Mrs. Dorrance Hamilton, who decided to return it to farming.
Right.
And she created the SVF Foundation. And today, this farm still works as an active place to do very pioneering work in saving endangered species in animals and plants.
Oh, that's great.
And by saving the semen and embryos of very rare animals, they can therefore look forward to a time when perhaps when these animals are no longer bred easily in the wild, and also help to protect us, because the idea for this goes back to the Irish potato famine, because that happened because there was a single type of potato that was grown. Once that crop failed, there was nothing.
Right.
Today, there are very few, there are one or two breeds of cattle, for instance, that are grown for dairy and for meat. And there are hundreds more breeds that simply aren't grown because they're not the most economical to develop on a large business scale.
Cool, cool. Well, very good. Now, I see over there a tucker. I'm trying to figure out how the tucker would play into today's theme.
You can't see it, Jay?
You're going to have to show me. Let's go
It's
take
obvious.
a look. Well, the tucker. This is probably the best example of noble failures. And I like noble failures. I like people who put their heart and soul into something, and maybe it was too good for the time, or it was ahead of its time, whatever. I think this car was a case of too many dreamers and not enough engineers, because the concept was good, but it was never finished by the time it reached production. Never reached production, I guess.
Well, Jay, the fact that you mentioned dreamers and engineers in the future, that's why we're here today at the SVF Foundation property with this car, because it was about looking forward,
Right.
which is exactly what the Foundation's work here is doing, looking forward. And to your point, one of the things that I know you and I feel it's so important to talk about when we talk about tuckers is the fact there's no such thing as a production tucker.
Right, right.
There are 51 prototypes.
Right.
And as do you, I think this is an amazing car, an amazing concept, and had it been a 1949 car, it could have really been something. Had they taken the time to actually do the final development, which the car needed, then it could have really been something amazing on the post-war scene.
Well, it's funny because I always hear people call it the Tucker Torpedo, but it was never called the Tucker Torpedo.
No.
Preston Tucker thought it would remind people of the horrors of World War II with torpedoes and bombs, and so it was called the Tucker 48 for 1948, which is again not thinking ahead, because when the 49s come out, you got a Tucker 48, you know. That was kind of weird. They never really got the engine right or the transmission right. I mean, the ideas behind it, some naive, some interesting. My favorite thing is the safety cell on the passenger side. There's a huge well. The idea, if you think you're going to crash, as a passenger, you would dive into this, you would roll them, and the car would crash around you, which, yeah. But he was thinking ahead, pop out windshield, safety glass. They're actually quite nice to drive. I drove Francis Ford Coppola's one. That had the Franklin aircraft engine in it, and it had the Auburn transmission. I mean, here's how out of money they were. They went around to junkyards and tried to buy old Cords so they could get the transmissions out of them to put them in this. And of course,
which again is a perfectly fine thing to do if you're building a few prototypes to test.
Right.
But to actually sell to the public, probably not the best idea.
Well, you know, they got a little overzealous. You know, he was arrested for stock manipulation. He was found innocent. What he did was he ran advertising saying 15 years of development has produced the greatest car. You know, typical ads. But it wasn't 15 years of development. There was no development. It was just developed almost right away.
15 years of ideas, perhaps.
Yeah, but they sort of gave the idea that this car had been running for 15 years and they got all the bugs out of it. And, you know, you can't really advertise that. I mean, I think his heart was in the right place. I don't think he was a crook.
No, I think that he was somebody whose imagination and enthusiasm got far ahead of him. And one of the things is that he engaged great engineers to work on this project.
Right.
And didn't really give them the time, or they didn't have the time to actually do it. He was very busy selling franchises to dealers to try to get the name out there, to try to get distribution established, because that was one thing he didn't have. He had a huge factory, he had great engineers, but he had no distribution.
I think the kindest thing you could say, he was not a detail man.
No.
He was a big picture guy. It's going to be unbelievable. Fix that, will you? You know, and there were so many little things.
And think about the level of technology that he wanted to put in the car. The individual motors for each engine, the front fenders that swiveled, with the lights
Right.
and all those things, which of course never made it to the prototype stage.
Even the center headlight was illegal in many states, so he had to come up with a cover for those states. You know, it wasn't well thought out. I think it was well intentioned. A guy named Larson, I think, designed the car. Then Alex Tremulous was brought in
To refine the
and
design.
he gets all the credit, but Larson actually designed the car. They went through a number of engines until they finally picked Franklin, the air-cooled company.
And which is also the great irony. I know you appreciate this because the engineering technology is uppermost in your mind and heart. You buy a company that produces this great air-cooled engine, and then you convert it to water cooling, put it in the back of the car where you can get no cooling to the engine. And your beloved Tatras, of course, had the engine in the back with a nice big scoop to get air to the engine where you needed it.
Right. Yeah, the Tatra was sort of the pre-Tucker. I'm surprised that Tuckers go for 10 times what Tatras go for. And a Tatra's an actual car with a V8 that you can drive. It was finished, it was refined. You know, like you said, if he had just a few more years, if he waited to 51 or 52 even, and got in, you know, the hedge fund guys to put the money in and do the way they do it now, you could bring it to the forefront. It was just one guy, nickel and diamond it the whole way. And yeah, I guess the famous journalist at the time, I can't remember his name, he wrote kind of a nasty article about, a true article about how the car was not finished. Like when he displayed this at the unveiling, there was no reverse gear. You couldn't back the car up. So, hey, everybody, let's kind of push it back a little bit.
And they also had to keep the car running.
Yeah, they had to keep it running, and it overheated while it was sitting there. You know, yeah, it was a disaster. But the design, the dream.
Design is to me, you know how I feel about design. Think about this in 1948. This design is absolutely amazing to see on the road, considering what was being offered to the consumer in 1948. And the great glory of this, as you have seen and experienced, and I have seen and experienced, quite luckily, this is a stunning car to sit here. But when you see one in motion, see the light passing across the shape is astonishing. And you know, this should have been a world beater.
And it's quite low.
Yes.
But see, as you see the doors cut into the roof, the only trouble with that is when it rains, these don't seal very well.
Yeah, there are no rain gutters on the car.
No, there's no rain gutters on the car.
But it was much easier to get in and out.
It's just they sold on such huge promises that people were disappointed. If they just kind of put it out there and let people discover it on their own, I think it might have been more successful. You know, it's why Tesla, I think, has been successful, is because they built the infrastructure for their vehicle as they built the vehicle. They assumed when everybody buys these cars, we're already going to have the charging stations for them, which they did. I mean, that's thinking ahead.
They invested as much in the infrastructure to support the cars as they did in the cars.
Right, right.
And it's something that, a mistake that Tucker made is something that a lot of European imports have made in the United States as well, thinking, well, the way we sell cars in the US is we simply put the cars on a boat, ship them to New York, to San Francisco, and let them loose without training mechanics and supplying spare parts and all of those necessary things to keep a car running.
Yeah. I mean, the Tucker movie was very good, but I don't believe the big three, GM, Chrysler, and Ford, were out to get Tucker. You know, DeLorean said the same thing. Oh, they're afraid of my car. No, you don't sell that many two-seater cars anyway. You know, it's not. It's you rise and fall on your own deal.
I think both of those situations are certainly cases where the guiding forces were their own worst enemies.
Right, right. But
the next car we're going to look at, however, is the case of a guiding force being the entire purpose and success of a car company.
Let's take a look. I've always had a soft spot for Morgans. This appears to be what, late 50s, 57?
1957 plus 4. We were talking about the vision of Preston Tucker and John DeLorean. This car, the Morgan, is the vision of the Morgan family and has been since 1909 when Henry Morgan started the company.
You know, it's interesting. Henry Morgan was more like Ford than he was like DeLorean or Tucker, because DeLorean and Tucker was selling high-end automobiles to fairly wealthy people. So the car had to be perfect.
Morgan was looking for transportation. In fact, he didn't even have four wheels. His first cars were three-wheelers because in England, anything less than four wheels did not have to pay a road tax. It was considered not a bicycle, but like a motorcycle. It wasn't considered a car. Anything less than four wheels, you didn't have the road tax, you didn't have a lot of other things. So it was very cheap and economical to build. So he built, not cheap, but the least expensive transportation vehicle he could. And of course, what happened is they got sold. People, once two guys meet on a road, there's going to be a race. And they started racing them. And that's where the heritage started. And then the four wheels really came much later. But they're back again, you know. They're producing three-wheelers again. And for exactly the same reason. They can bring them into the United States without crash tests or airbags or any of that stuff, because they're not considered automobiles. They're considered, I guess, some kind of motorcycle. In fact, some states you might have to even wear a helmet if you drive a Morgan.
Well, one of the great things, of course, about a Morgan, the four-wheel variety, is the fact that they bring you back to a time of much more direct motoring, typically pre-war motoring. This is a 1957, but it's got the feel of a 1930s sports car. And again, much like the place where we are here at the SVF Foundation, it's not exactly what it seems. It looks like an antique car, but in 1957, it was a thoroughly modern car to drive.
Well, it still had the sliding pillar suspension, which was quite primitive. That's the original thing he had in 1909. It still had that. It uses a Triumph Tr3 engine. I liked it. It's all British. The new Morgans are nice, but they use a BMW motor and their automatic transmission, but all that kind of stuff. So this is the most vintage, brand new car you could buy.
Well, I have to just take a little bit of discussion about the sliding pillar suspension. Remember, Lancia was also still using it in the 1950s, so it was a very sophisticated suspension.
Oh yeah, but I'm saying it's since the beginning of the company.
Yeah.
They, you know, something's not broken, don't fix it. You know, everybody else has changed for the sake of change. So Morgan could continue to make the same vehicle. And this was considered an old-fashioned car even back in *57.
Absolutely, but it gave you that style, but it still gave you the confidence to drive on modern roads in a way that's very involving. And one of the other things, of course, that you and I hear all the time is, oh, Morgan, those are the people that make those wooden cars.
Right.
The wooden framed cars.
Right.
And of course, it's the body was framed in wood, as was the typical coach building fashion.
Right.
But of course, the frames, the chassis of the car are steel.
Right, but it was ash. I think that was
Ash,
the word.
exactly.
Yeah,
Ash framing, which is very strong, durable, and flexible, which is also something that you wanted in a body. But it's quite interesting that now Morgan is actually for the first time making a non-wood framed body in the car. So that's a step forward into the 20th century, now that we're 2 decades into the 21st.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is the most desirable Morgan because it has the look and feel of the period, because it is the period. The new ones, you know, you've got the airbag and the kind of the headrest, and you know, it doesn't seem vintagey the way this does. You know, it has the look of this, but does not drive or handle the way this does. And these are quite satisfying cars to drive.
Well, you know, one of the things that Morgan faced as a challenge was the idea when they wanted to do an update of the car, their very loyal customer base almost rebelled at times.
Right.
They came up with that wonderful, what I think is a really beautiful coupe in the early 1960s, the +4 Plus,
Right.
which I think is a stunning car.
Yeah.
But the Morganists ran away from it in droves. And then there was that other, the Aero coupe was also first not very well received by the Morgan traditionalists.
Right, yeah. And the funny thing is, you know, they shriek with delight when you buy a 2015 Morgan and deliver it in 2020. It's 5 years, because it takes so long to get your car. But people, that just seems to be part of the charm. You order it, and it can be years before you get it in that sort of English way. And that's what's fantastic. But this one is really beautiful. Let's take it for a ride.
Absolutely.
People were much smaller back in the 50s. Get in this thing.
I think we were much smaller back in the 50s. Too.
I was much smaller back in the 50s.
And people never wore
But once you're in,
blazers.
once you're in, there's a lot of room.
There is.
Oh, I love that. Oh, and it's got this goofball shifter.
So Jay, this is sort of the polar opposite of the Isotta town car that we came into SVF in, but somehow equally adapted to the terrain and scenery.
This is really the epitome of British sports cars. Light. This is exactly what it's supposed to be. Light. You know, kind of quick, easy to steer.
And we're here, not in the countryside. We are a part of the countryside.
Yeah, right.
There are all sorts of legends also that grow up around cars, and the legend around Morgans is always that you can't ride in a Morgan on anything but a billiard table because otherwise your kidneys will be punched to death.
Yeah.
But do you think this is any rougher or harder than any other sports car of its type?
No, not on a smooth road. I mean,
These roads are semi-smooth.
But like every rumor, every myth, there's a basis in fact.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's probably a certain amount of truth to it, because I have two Morgans. I've got one from the early 30s, and I've got a modern one, and they do kind of, you know, when you hit that, bang, you hit that one bump, and you know.
But I think that the suspension is actually pretty good considering the nature of the car. And
No,
yeah, there's probably not a lot of travel in the suspension, but you
No,
know,
it's very good. It's
and the
very
seats
nice.
are also comfortable. That's the thing that people also don't think about. The combination, the package of suspension, tires, and seats make a big difference as well.
Right.
If you've got this sort of rock-hard racing seat and a not very compliant suspension and very thin tires, then you're going to feel every pebble there is in the road.
You know, it's a very pleasant place to be. The steering wheel has a nice feel. The steering is very direct. The gauges all have that antique patina look to them.
Yeah.
With the font is that sort of early English. I mean, it's very nice. I like the speedometer optimistically goes to 90. You know, that's another one. You talk about myths. That's a great one. People think whatever the speedometer says, that's what the car can do. My Miura is in kilometers, it says 320. People go, whoa, this goes 320 miles an hour? I go, yeah, it goes 320 miles an hour.
There's a wonderful fact as well of speedometer error.
Right.
And every manufacturer builds in a certain measure of speedometer error, mostly to protect the motorist. But it also can be one of those things that is very ego-inflating, shall we say?
Yeah.
I was cruising along at 100 miles per hour, and you realize that with the speedometer error, you're actually going 75.
Right,
It's
right.
okay.
It is like a deux chevaux.
Yeah. That rather unique shift pattern and shifter layout.
It's so funny because I think Triumph had a 4-speed in 57.
Yeah.
But why Morgan chose to go with a 3-speed?
Closer.
It doesn't make any sense. I think this was a lot lighter than a Triumph, probably too.
Oh, certainly. There's absolutely there's not a lot of sound deadening in a Triumph, but there's absolutely none in this car. It's the essential components, and that's it. Although the concession to refinement in this very, very nicely finished mahogany dashboard is great, and I love this little crackle finished center portion. You know, you've got a little bit of sort of Aston Martin-esque going on here. It's just a car that just brings a smile to your face, you know?
It's funny, you know, when you get in this car, you sit low and you look down what appears to be a long hood. It's really not, but
Right.
the fact that you're so low, it gives the appearance of high speed.
Exactly. You know, that's another thing that when you're driving a car, and the fact that it's almost always much more fun to me to drive a slow-ish car quickly
Right.
than to drive a really, really fast car slowly.
Right.
And being in a totally open car like this, you get a sensation of speed that you just don't get in a
Right.
modern sedan, where you can go
The
100 miles
steering-
per hour and feel like
yeah.
you're doing nothing.
You know, as one thing, I thought I was doing this like I was driving an old movie, you know, with this projection screen behind me. Whereas this thing, boy, input is unbelievable. The slightest input affects the car.
Which is exactly what you want in a car like this. Sort of having an extension of your thoughts. So driving along in this Morgan is sort of the epitome of English sports car touring.
It really is. This is what English motoring is all about. Light little car, you know, kind of a sprightly engine, you know, the whole deal.
And that sensation of speed, the impression of speed, it doesn't have to be absolute speed, you know, it's the fact that we're in a totally open car, we've got the wind, we've got the smells of the field and the trees, and that really brings it very, very close to you, you know? I've done events. I'm really sort of a coupe and sedan guy, but I've done a few rally events, including your favorite event, the Mille Miglia, in a totally open car. And I tell you that it's great when you're riding past a freshly mowed field or a field where they put down fertilizer. It's really fantastic. Now, when it's pouring rain, on the other hand,
well, you know what's interesting? I've got a Carrera GT, and it's a totally different vehicle with the roof up. It's claustrophobic. I can't see out the back. I feel like there's somebody coming around, and not tough to get into, but it's just awkward. As an open car, you jump into it, and it's like this. It feels exactly like this. The whole sensation is different. I've only had the top on that car probably twice. Once when it started to rain, and once my wife just got tired of the wind blowing in her hair. You know? I like this car. I would buy one of these.
Yes, it's very, very cool. This might be the perfect kind of car for you to keep here in Newport.
Yeah.
Makes a nice sound too, doesn't it?
It does make a nice sound, yeah. Well, I've got a 1960 Triumph Tr3, so I know this motor, and it's a wonderful little engine.
Yeah, it's very funny. You think about the development of the British sports car in the 1950s, and obviously it came into the 1950s in a very pre-war mode with the MGs and Triumphs and even the Morgans. And all of a sudden, I think in 1955, when the MGA came out, all of a sudden British sports cars looked futuristic for the first time, you know, after World War II. And I think it was sort of tough on Triumph until they had the TR4 come out, which is one of my favorite British sports cars because I'm such an Italophile, you know, the Michelotti designed body. I had a TR4 with the Surrey top, the removable hardtop.
To me, my dream car when I was a kid was the 66 Triumph TR4A IRS.
Ah.
That had the independent rear suspension, roll-up windows. That seemed like the height of, I mean, it probably wouldn't impress me much now, but I've got to try and drive one of those again, just to see what it's, not again, for the first time.
Well, it's interesting. I drove one last summer. A friend of mine let me use it for the month, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it as much as my earlier TR4 with the beam axle.
Yeah,
I found that the rear suspension was a little crashy, frankly, but I know that they had to go with independent suspension because all the competitors had independent suspension, so they had to go.
They didn't sell many with the independent suspension.
No, they didn't.
It's fairly rare. So, you know, Mustang, it took a long time for them to get it because Mustangs were used primarily, not primarily, but very popular drag racers, and people wanted to lay down rubber, and the beam axle was the way to go.
Exactly. It's also an interesting point that you bring up, which is about technology is terrific in the abstract, but when you're putting a car together, you need to think about how all the pieces go together in the way that the owner will use the car.
Right.
And this is an example of, you wouldn't think, well, okay, we got the recipe for a 1950s sports car. We'll have this fairly small 4-cylinder engine, a 3-speed transmission, an ash-framed body, and a pre-war styling. And that's the look. But it works, doesn't it?
You know, this is a perfect car to end the segment on because I can drop you off and then go for a ride and enjoy myself.
Absolutely. I think that this absolutely epitomizes the entire idea of the SVF property, the fact that it's something that looks old, but actually is modern.
Yeah, kind of like us.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Thank you. It was built for Commodore Arthur James and his wife Harriet by the architects Grosvenor Atterbury and Stowe Phelps.
And McGillicuddy. It's a bunch of architects.
Some guys like drew it up for him, and they had a great time. Architect.
It's an emotional experience, I understand.
It's I just get so choked up whenever I'm here. It was built for Commodore Arthur James and his wife Harriet by the architects
Attaboy.